AMD is already aggressively targeting the price of the RTX 4080. And let's talk about performance, with their GPUs coming out December 13th on 2022. And they're giving us some performance graphs. We are going to analyze here some of the performance features, all of that, comparing the 4080, which I have now had the chance to fully review. Check the video if you haven't yet. And then also look at how this stacks up. Again, it's coming in at a lower price. You know what else is coming in at a lower price than its competitors? Today's sponsor. Let me tell you about today's sponsor. So this is a docking station for the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is really cool as a portable device, but sometimes you would like to try plugging it into a screen or plugging in peripheral devices, in which case it's helpful to have a docking solution. I like the 90-degree power connector on the USB Type-C, and I think it goes up to 100 watts of power. Also, it's less expensive than the official Steam Deck dock. One reason is the Steam Deck dock official version sells you an extra power connector included, which you might not need, and nobody likes paying for something they don't need. Also, some of the competing models on third party only have a 4K 30 hertz capability for output, but this has HDMI 2.0 that can go up to 4K 60. We also have gigabit Ethernet ports, and again, some of the competing products don't go up to gigabit internet, and this has 3 USB Type 3 ports for, again, connecting peripherals, and again, we should have enough power for this. I also like the aluminum design, and the last thing I'll mention is that the Steam Deck itself, part of its cooling solution, has these vents, and some of the competing Steam Deck docks do not take that into account, and they block the vent. This one has taken that into account, and you don't have reduced cooling functionality, which is great. So take a look at the pinned comment and video description for a link to check one of these out. Anyway, so AMD is coming out with the 7900 XT and the 7900 XTX. We have some performance numbers. Now, one thing I'm going to mention right here is that I don't like the pricing of the 7900 XT. The XTX could be viewed as aggressively priced against the 4080 and at least not rising in price compared to the 6900 XT. But I'm going to say right out the gate that while I'm mad about the Nvidia pricing, I'm like even more mad about that. I'm also not a huge fan of this pricing, and I would love to see the 7900 XT version cut down by more than $100 here. I don't mind a $1,000 flagship, but I would like this next step down to be cut down more. But anyway, let's look at the performance numbers that we have here. So AMD is claiming these performance numbers, which I'm blocking, so out of the way. In Resident Evil Village, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Cyberpunk 2077, Watch Dogs Legion, we have a gray bar, a white bar, and a red bar, given the 6950 XT, their previous generation flagship, the 7900 XT, and then the 7900 XTX. And again, I think of these two, of the new ones, the XTX version certainly seems to be the more interesting one. They're also giving us ray tracing numbers. Now, when we compare this to the RTX 4080, we're going to have to be very careful how we do this and understand that I do not have a 7900 XTX to actually benchmark on the same system. So that's one thing that can influence results. The other thing is, most of these results are actually kind of useless for a direct comparison to the 4080, because we don't know what scene of the game is being tested. So, in other words, Hitman 3 does have a built-in benchmark, but it has multiple different built-in benchmarks. So even if they're using the built-in benchmark, I couldn't tell you which one they're using exactly. Also, Dying Light 2 doesn't really have a built-in benchmark, at least last time I looked at the game, and neither does Resident Evil Village. Cyberpunk 2077, though, does have one built-in benchmark, and I did review it on my 4080, and I have some comparison data for you there. Same thing jumping over to these games. This is mostly Cyberpunk and Resident Evil Village, okay, this is the non-ray traced results. And then, again, Cyberpunk, we might be able to use this as reasonable comparison data. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, as a side note, I wanted to review that in my RTX 4080 review. I was going to do it, but the game wouldn't launch with the review driver. So I'm not sure. Now, I didn't have enough time to follow up on that or figure out if it was just some random computer issues I was having. But anyway, the review driver would not let me benchmark the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Now, Watch Dogs Legion, I think, does have a built-in benchmark, but I have not benchmarked my 4080. It's not part of my test suite. But again, this gives us Cyberpunk 2077 here. Now, I've got several things to compare this with, but again, I need to mention that this is kind of an assumption that this is the built-in benchmark being used here. However, while I don't have a 6950 XT of my own, I did verify that these numbers here are at least similar to what other people have reported in the built-in benchmark at these settings for a 6950 XT. And again, same thing here. For example, in the Linus Tech Tips 4080 review, they did give 6950 XT results. Now, their results were a few FPS higher than what we're seeing here claimed by AMD, but AMD is going to be using the reference model of the 6950 XT most likely for comparison, whereas Linus Tech Tips said that they were using their highest-end AIB partner, 6950 XT Red Devil model. So it makes sense for their results to be a few FPS higher. So in other words, I think we can be, at least it's not completely worthless to make this comparison, although obviously we'll need to wait for full reviews for this to really make a lot of sense. Now, what am I going to compare it with? First of all, I also brought up my 3090 Ti. So this is performance numbers from my 3090 Ti. This is the actual benchmark run. Like we could even watch the benchmark run, all of that, right? So this is the actual benchmark run. And I've got these videos here. This is the 3090 Ti. This is 4K Ultra with no upscaling. That's what we're seeing here. And then we also have 4K RT Ultra. And yes, the 3090 Ti does get below 30 FPS at 4K RT Ultra without upscaling. It is brutal. So, for example, if you were looking at the non-FSR result of the 7900 XTX and thinking, wow, it's not even getting 30 FPS, it's not, but neither does the 3090 Ti, although my 3090 Ti did a little bit better. Also remember, I'm not on the same test system as them, so this is not, even if they're doing the built-in benchmarks, this is still just rough comparisons. This is not perfect. I need to keep stressing that. Now, to compare to the FSR results, again, this is imperfect, but the best thing we could do here is use the performance mode for NVIDIA's upscaler. So NVIDIA, using DLSS performance, my 3090 Ti is getting almost 62 FPS. So if I rounded this the same way that they rounded, this is a tie. So interestingly here, we're seeing the 7900 XTX tying the performance of my 3090 Ti in Cyberpunk Ultra RT 4K benchmark. Again, using, this is FSR performance versus I'm using DLSS performance, but again, that's the equivalent technology between the GPUs. Now, let's jump on over to, here's my 4080. So my 4080 in 4K RT Ultra without ray tracing, without upscaling, was still a little bit below 30 FPS. So now, percentage-wise, that's significantly better than what we saw from the 7900 XTX at 21 FPS, but still, overall, absolute performance-wise, not super impressive until you use upscaling. So DLSS performance mode on my 4080 got me up to 76 FPS average. So that is definitely beating the 7900 XTX in ray tracing performance with performance upscaling. Now, if we look at just 4K Ultra results with no ray tracing, I'm seeing a 62 FPS result, whereas AMD is claiming, and again, this is AMD marketing materials, so keep that in mind, they're claiming 72 FPS on their XTX model, and their 7900 XT model is actually at 60 FPS, which is closer to what we're seeing from my RTX 4080. So if we want to look at these in terms of overall percentages, we've got a couple of things that we could look at here. Okay, so hopping into the calculator to get us some percentages, and again, this is rough estimates. I'm not on the same test system. There could be all sorts of things affecting this, so this is just rough figures. Here we've got our upscaled ray tracing result. So this is the upscaled ray tracing result for the 4080 divided by the upscaled ray tracing result for the 7900 XTX, and we're seeing a more than 20% performance lead in ray tracing for the 4080. Now, if I go with the non-upscaled result, then I'm seeing a almost 37% uplift for my 4080. So this is looking like a pretty heavy ray tracing advantage for the 4080 against the 7900 XTX based on the numbers that I have. Again, these are imperfect, and with numbers these small especially, changing this by just a couple, right? Just a couple FPS swings the percentage in widely, okay? So I think all I can say here is it seems like we definitely have noticeably stronger ray tracing performance, but it's hard to say exactly what the percentage will be until we actually have the same GPUs benchmarked on the same system. Now, if we go to the non-ray traced results, and I do the same thing, this is the RTX 4080 divided by the 7900 XTX, we're now seeing 0.86. That means that the the RTX 4080 is getting about 86% of the rasterized performance of the 7900 XTX. Now, I know some people hate looking at it as percentages like 86% of the performance of something. So if I flip this around, the other way of saying that is that the 7900 XTX has a 16% performance lead in rasterized performance at 4K max settings in non-ray traced in that Cyberpunk benchmark. Again, these are ballpark figures due to all the issues with the calculations that I keep bringing up. And if you're like, wait, that seems like it would be a 14% difference, but that's 16% difference? Yes, that's the confusing thing about how percentages work when you're calculating one way or the other, because the percentage is based off of a different thing as the baseline anyway. That's just how it works, guys. This isn't math class today, though. Now, I thought it would also be interesting to do the same thing, but compared against my 3090 Ti. So remember that we basically had the same performance when upscaled in ray tracing, right? So remember we had the 62 FPS result for both of them, so they're basically tied when you're using that upscaled result. When I'm using the non-upscaled ray tracing result, I am seeing like a 13% lead for the 3090 Ti. However, I do want to mention, again, this is like this is a less than 3 FPS difference, but percentage-wise, that comes out big due to the small numbers. But that means that any margin of error by a single FPS or two here will swing this result wildly, so that has to be taken into consideration. Don't take that as me saying the 3090 Ti is 13% faster. That's just the numbers that we have right now. And again, that's at ray tracing. So what this is telling me is that it sounds like the 7900 XTX is at least within the ballpark of a 3090 Ti in ray tracing performance, which would also probably put it, similar or better to something like a 3080 or something that is considered a decent ray tracing GPU in this previous generation that we're now moving on from. So that's interesting. But again, it looks like it is going to be significantly behind the 4080. It also costs less than a 4080. Anyway, then if we look at the non-ray tracing results, we're seeing the 3090 Ti getting only about 75% of the performance of the 7900 XTX. But then if we flip that, because I know some people prefer that way of looking at it, the other way of saying that is that the 7900 XTX is looking to be about 34% faster than the 3090 Ti, again, according to these imperfect numbers, and I keep having to say that. So, interesting stuff. What does it mean? So, first of all, it is just speculation, okay? It's educated guess, right? But it is still speculation off of what we have to go off of. But I think what it looks like is that the 7900 XTX might have usable ray tracing performance, but I would say that while they're giving us 4K numbers, its ray tracing to me sounds like it's going to be maybe more usable at lower resolutions. If you're buying this for 1440p, I think the ray tracing performance might be something to be a lot happier with. I was never happy with the 3000 series from Nvidia really at 4K ray tracing. I was a lot happier with it at 1440p ray tracing. So if AMD is catching up to that generation's ray tracing performance, then I think it could be a good choice. In other words, you could actually use the ray tracing, right? Although it's definitely not catching up to the 4080. Now, in terms of rasterized performance, it's looking like it's going to be offering a significantly better deal here than the 4080. It looks like it's coming out ahead for less money. Again, I still wish that one was priced lower. Anyway, now, for those of you who are just like, and I know you guys are out there, I just want AMD to do well so it brings down the price of Nvidia so I can just buy Nvidia. Okay, well, here's the thing. I don't think that really happens. So if that's what you're waiting for, let me just show you current pricing in PC Part Picker on some AMD versus Nvidia competitors, and I'll show you that while AMD is priced significantly less, people are still paying more to get the Nvidia product. So I don't anticipate AMD's competition heavily bringing down the price of the 4000 series anytime soon. I would love to be wrong, but the RX 6650 from AMD is rasterized performance about as good or even better than an RTX 3060. However, you can buy them right now for around $260, and an RTX 3060 costs around $370. So that's a huge pricing difference, both in absolute dollars and even bigger in terms of percentage difference. Even an RTX 3050, which just performance-wise in rasterized performance gets absolutely crushed by that 6650 XT, the 3050 still costs more. And then even in ray tracing performance, the 3050 doesn't have as big of an advantage as you might think here, because it's just such a weaker GPU overall when compared to something like the 6650 XT. And I could continue to do this up and down the product stack, just to pick some random stuff. Like, for example, an RTX 3080 priced low to high right now. Wow, they went up. It looks like, man, did the 4080 announcement make people buy up the cheap 3080s? I think it did. I think Nvidia's plan is working. They priced the 4000 series high enough that they're selling out their 3000 series stock. Because when I checked this yesterday, there were $730, $750 models still available. Anyway, $816 there for a 3080. Whereas the similar performing AMD GPU with the 6800 XT is coming in at $515. Now, obviously, it gets beat in ray tracing and gets close in rasterized performance. But do you guys see what I'm saying here? The AMD GPUs with similar rasterized performance cost significantly less, and it doesn't seem to be pressuring the price of Nvidia. It's like Nvidia is competing against themselves in terms of pricing. So if you're just waiting for AMD to bring down the price of the 4080, I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think what Nvidia is going to do is sell out their 3000 series stock before considering pricing reductions on their 4000 series, unless people just don't buy their 4000 series. But the 4090 certainly sold out and is currently commanding extremely high pricing. Let's check on how it's doing this morning. Yep, still over $2,000 if you wanted to buy one new right now. Okay, now AMD also is going to be coming in with different features and that kind of things, so we could dive in a little bit on this. Now, AMD's upscaling technology, FSR, is catching up to DLSS, but I did a big head-to-head comparison on this recently when Cyberpunk got its update for FSR 2.1, and I did not think that FSR was quite as good as DLSS. I think it's getting closer, it's very usable, but it's still not quite as good. And then DLSS 3 frame generation, which I think should just not be called DLSS, but their frame generation feature, which increases the motion fluidity of the game at some penalties to latency and image quality, but has its uses. I did like it in Plague Tale Requiem, but didn't like it in Spider-Man. Anyway, the point is that AMD, while announcing an upcoming competitor to that, they've said it's not coming until 2023, and we don't even have a specific date on that. So, and then AMD is also less well supported in professional applications. There's a lot of things that really require CUDA support and are just programmed to work better on NVIDIA due to their larger market share and all of that. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of reasons why AMD does get priced less, and people still go ahead and buy the NVIDIA GPU and all of that. Now, AMD did announce HyperRX with their announcement, but I think a lot of people are misunderstanding this. And I've talked about this before, but this is not a new feature at all. So if people were thinking that this is some kind of new feature that's going to give you an 85% performance boost, no. This is just a button that turns on things that already existed. It just turns on RSR, which is just a driver level upscaling similar to Nvidia's NIS or to AMD's own FSR 1.0, but this is integrated into the driver. This is not like the 2.0 version. Radeon Boost, which is like a variable, it reduces the resolution of the game when you're moving quickly to try to gain some performance there. And Radeon Anti-Lag, which is kind of like NVIDIA Reflex, it reduces latency. The point is, those technologies already exist. This isn't something new. It's just going to be labeled under a single button now, and that's coming sometime in 2023. So I've seen people trying to post that like, oh, with HyperRX, it's going to be just dominating or something like that. No, I don't think so. Now, AMD is also targeting, again, I think the price is the most relevant target here. AMD in their marketing is also targeting the size of the 4080 and the power plug. Now, I'm hoping the power plug issue doesn't continue to be an issue, at least on the 4080, because the 4080 is drawing significantly less power. It's actually extremely power efficient for the performance that it's giving, so I'm hoping that that turns out to be a non-issue on the 4080. Speaking of the power plug, though, we're now seeing reports of the 4090 Founders Edition also having a 16-pin cord meltdown. And that's now the Founders Edition. Until now, I think we'd only seen AIB partner cards. So interesting that we're seeing that. But once again, I think at least compared to the 4080, this is probably less of an issue. But I still like the better reliability and familiarity and not needing the ugly looking little adapters and things like that on the AMD GPU. So I think that is a legitimate plus. And again, I like that they have the DisplayPort 2.1, but I think they're making way bigger deal out of this than I think is necessarily necessary. Current monitor, this is more of a future-looking thing, and I do think NVIDIA should have included it. But DisplayPort 1.4a handles current monitors very well, and people saying that you can't go past 4K 120 Hz on DisplayPort 1.4a, that's only partially true. You can go up to 4K 240 with display stream compression, which, to my knowledge, is very, very difficult, if even possible, to actually visually distinguish between a non-display stream compressed feed. So in other words, it's not like you can't run those just at maybe some sort of minor penalty. So this is an advantage for AMD, but I don't think it's as big of an advantage as AMD spent during their whole, marketing announcement thing for this. Although again, NVIDIA really should have put the newer version of DisplayPort here. I think it's kind of silly that they didn't. So overall, I think for people, I think this is offering a really compelling option, and I really do hope that more people do start to take advantage of what AMD is offering, and that I end up being wrong, and that does drive down NVIDIA's pricing, because I would really like to see stronger competition here. In the long term, I'd also like to see some stronger competition coming from Intel. And on that note, while people have been talking about Intel, getting out of the discrete business, it's just going terribly. Well, we're actually seeing them acquiring a new VP and GM of discrete graphics. So it does not sound to me like they are, abandoning that whole market like had been speculated or reported on or rumored, which it just doesn't seem to be true. Now, if you're interested in this as just a bit of a side note, she was most recently the VP of Alienware and Dell Gaming, and if you're not a fan of Alienware and Dell Gaming, I guess she made a name for herself working at ASUS. So anyway, maybe you're a fan of ASUS, but not Alienware. So anyway, I'll throw that in there. So anyway, I hope we get more competition in the market space. What do you guys think about all this? Are you trying to get a 4080? Are you waiting for prices to come down? Are you going to buy the AMD GPU? Are we just depressed that we're calling $1,000 a good value? Because I kind of am. Anyway, I hope all of you have an excellent day.